Hi. Remember in middle school biology class when we learned about the fight or flight response? That's when animals experiencing stress either fight off the threat or run away. Think about when a squirrel sees a large dog and it runs up a tree. Or when a tiger feels cornered, it lashes out and attacks. And there's really a third reaction. There's freeze. Think about when a deer gets caught in a car's headlights. And we learned about how this basic biological reaction, the fight, flight, and freeze reaction, really determines a lot of animal behavior. And now let's not forget that we too are animals. And when we're not conscious of our thoughts, feelings, and actions, we too get triggered and our behavior is determined by this fight, flight, and freeze reaction. And just like the squirrel that runs away from a handful of food, our fight, flight, or freeze reaction often gets overly triggered. It gets triggered when it really doesn't need to. And there's a lot of stuff in our environment that triggers that reaction. We get triggered by insults. We get triggered by judgments, comparisons, punishments, and rewards. We get triggered when we're disconnected from other people. We get triggered when we're afraid that our needs aren't going to get met by a certain situation. And there's a lot of problems that come with having our fight, flight, freeze reaction triggered. When that happens, our mental activity moves from one region of the brain to another. Namely, it moves from our neocortex, which is responsible for things like language, emotional control, planning, and awareness, and it moves to our limbic system, responsible for anger and instincts and impulses. And this is really great for us sometimes. This is really great when we're actually in life-threatening situations. So when we're trying to avoid getting hit by a car, in that moment our whole mind goes blank, and all we can think about is one thought, which is jump out of the way, which is really great for us. It really helps us to survive. But that fight, flight, freeze reaction also gets triggered when my partner is expressing her frustration about all the dirty dishes in the sink. And it's not so helpful that in that moment my mind goes completely blank and the only thought I can think of is, man, how do I prove that she's wrong and I'm right and there's nothing to debate here, she just needs to move on with her life. That's problematic because the goal of nonviolent communication is to engage in honest and empathetic connection with other people and with ourselves. And when we get triggered to that fight, flight, or freeze reaction, it gets really hard to do that. It's hard because our whole mind shuts down. Our ability to connect with people literally gets hampered because our mind is preoccupied with surviving or overcoming an obstacle. And so how do we do that? How do we avoid getting triggered? And how do we, once we notice we are triggered, calm ourselves down and get reconnected with our neocortex? Well, luckily we have a lot of tools. In nonviolent communication, we use empathy, judgment-free I statements. We talk about our feelings rather than our thoughts. We make requests rather than demands. And we hold on to our strategies loosely while holding our needs tightly. And all of this and more are great ways to avoid triggering our own fight, flight, or freeze reaction, and to avoid triggering other people's fight, flight, or freeze reaction. And that's really important Because when we avoid triggering other people's fight, flight, or freeze reaction, then two things happen. One is that they're much more available to connect and empathize and communicate with us. And two, when someone is fighting with us or they're running away from us, it's so much easier for us to get triggered into a fight, flight, or freeze reaction. So when I avoid triggering someone else's fight, flight, or freeze reaction, I'm actually helping myself to also avoid getting triggered. And staying connected, staying at the level of feelings and needs, and making observations rather than judgments or comparisons, and making requests rather than demands, we really allow ourselves the space to breathe easy, to notice that our lives aren't threatened by these situations, and then we're able to calm down. We're able to reconnect with our neocortex or avoid altogether getting triggered.